Day 1063 of the Trump administration, easily the most consequential day of this president's term in office. Tonight's vote in the full House of Representatives makes Donald Trump just the third American president to be impeached. The very moment House members were casting their votes, Trump was on stage rallying supporters in Battle Creek, Michigan. The New York Times and Washington Post front pages both put it succinctly with headlines that stretch across all columns, reading simply, Trump impeached. Tonight's vote, Article 1, abuse of power, was 230 to 197. Two Democrats, as predicted, voted with the other side. Moments later, Article 2, obstruction of Congress, passed 229 to 198. Three Democrats voted with the Republicans against the second article. Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, running for president as a Democrat, voted present on both articles. The lone independent in the House, former Republican from Michigan, Justin Amash, joined Democrats voting for impeachment. These two articles will now be sent to the Senate. Trump is expected to face an impeachment trial there sometime in early January. But as we said, there's been a hitch in that just tonight. We'll have more on that specifically coming up. Remember, however, it was a phone call between the U.S. and Ukrainian presidents almost 5 months ago now that put us where we are tonight. Almost 3 months ago, Speaker Pelosi made that decision to formally open an inquiry. Tonight, indeed, she delivered her caucus. Today, clad in black, she opened the more than 8-hour debate on whether the president should be removed from office.
Today, as Speaker of the House, I solemnly and sadly open the debate on the impeachment of the President of the United States. If we do not act now, we would be derelict in our duty. It is tragic that the President's reckless actions make impeachment necessary. He gave us no choice.
You've been wanting to do this ever since the gentleman was elected. Mr. President came forward and did what he saw fit for the American people, but yet they wanted to impeach him.
On December 7th, 1941, a horrific act happened in the United States, and it's one that President Roosevelt said, this is a date that will live in infamy. Today, December the 18th, 2019, is another date that will live in infamy.
What we are doing here today is not only patriotic, it is uniquely American. America is a story of ordinary people confronting abuses of power with a steadfast pursuit of justice.
The impeachment serves two purposes. Number one, stop the investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice and Ukraine into the corruption of Ukraine interference into the U.S. Election in 2016.
I am deeply concerned that any member of the House would spout Russian propaganda on the floor of the House.
I rise today in support of these articles of impeachment. I come to this floor not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as an American who cares deeply about the Constitution, the rule of law, and the rights of the people.
Never, in all my years of serving in this great institution that I love, and the people of my district, did I ever expect to encounter such an obvious wrongdoing by a president of the United States.
So you heard how some of the talking points went today, some of them translated from the original Russian. We heard at least one Pearl Harbor reference. One other moment that drew a lot of attention was when one of the Republican House members compared the impeachment of Trump to the trial of Jesus.
When Jesus was falsely accused of treason, Pontius Pilate gave Jesus the opportunity to face his accusers. During that sham trial, Pontius Pilate afforded more rights to Jesus than the Democrats have afforded this president in this process.
That brought this response from author and Jesuit priest Father James Martin, quote, Pilate had Jesus beaten and whipped, thrown into jail overnight, marched through the streets carrying his cross, then nailed to that cross until he died. Comparing the treatment received by the president to what Jesus suffered is absurd. Also, only one of them is sinless. President Trump spent much of his day inside the White House and certainly on his phone, and today's proceedings were clearly on his mind. Just before midnight here last night, he sent this, quote, They want to impeach me. I'm not worried. These people are crazy. The president's social media feed erupted again early this morning with dozens of tweets and retweets, including some in his favorite all caps, quote, "I did nothing wrong," and shouting now, "Atrocious lies by the radical left, do-nothing Democrats. This is an assault on America and an assault on the Republican Party." And we mentioned Trump was on stage tonight at his rally in Battle Creek, Michigan, as he was angry and raw, and included a disgraceful retelling of the death of John Dingell. John Dingell represented Michigan in the House of Representatives from 1955 to 2015, just under 60 years in all. That's a record for Congress. As any president would, Trump approved military honors for Dingell's funeral, who, as a World War II veteran, is buried at Arlington. Trump talked about it in terms of a favor he did for Dingell's widow, now Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Democrat of Michigan.
Then you have this Dingell. You know Dingell from Michigan? You know Dingell? Ever hear of her, Michigan? Debbie Dingell, that's a real beauty. So she calls me up like 8 months ago. Her husband was here a long time. But I didn't give him the B treatment. I didn't give him the C or the D. I could have. Nobody would have, you know. I gave the A+ treatment. Take down the flags. Why are you taking them down? For ex-Congressman Dingell. Oh, okay. Do this, do that, do that. Rotunda, everything. I gave him everything. That's okay. I don't want anything for it. I don't need anything for anything. She calls me up. It's the nicest thing that's ever happened. Thank you so much. John would be so thrilled. He's looking down, he'd be so thrilled. Thank you so much, sir. I said, that's okay, don't worry about it. Maybe he's looking up, I don't know.
As for what comes next, the Washington Post and Politico report some Democrats, including House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, are considering a proposal to delay sending articles of impeachment over to the other chamber, into the Senate. The Post writes that they see a delay as a way to force Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to, quote, conduct a trial on more favorable terms for Democrats. And if no agreement is reached, some have argued the trial could be delayed indefinitely, denying Trump an expected acquittal. Tonight, the Speaker was asked when she planned to send the articles to the Senate.
You would wait to send the articles until you understand what the Senate's going to do?
We'll make a decision as a group, as we always have, as we go along. We'll decide what that dynamic is, but we hope that the resolution of that process will be soon in the Senate.
Guarantee that the impeachment articles will be at some point sent to the Senate.
I'm not
guarantee that.
That would have been our intention, but we'll see what happens over there.
Senate Majority Leader McConnell says he'll be meeting with Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to discuss the president's trial before the Senate leaves for the holiday recess. And not long ago, McConnell posted that he'll be speaking on the Senate floor about what he called the, quote, House Democrats' precedent-breaking impeachment of the President of the United States. Meanwhile, some new polls providing a late live window into the opinions on impeachment and this president. New NBC News Wall Street Journal poll finds the nation split on impeachment and removal from office. 48% say they support it, 48% do not. Then there's a new survey from the Military Times. They find Trump's standing among those in the armed forces has declined since he took office. His military approval rating now stands at 42%, down from 46% in 2016.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.